new Zoom stuff. Okay, so I have started the recording. So thank you all for being here. And I did not see in the chat area any pressing questions about the course. At any point during our discussion, you can either unmute yourself to ask a question, or you can type it into the chat, and I will save the last 5 minutes or so to make sure that I address any questions. But this virtual discussion, I envision it as not a lecture time, but as a time to get you to talk about the literature that we're looking at. And hopefully that makes sense. And so today, most of our discussion will be about the supplementary, like I call them anchor texts. That's the text by Foster, Glover, McCracken, and Rexroth. So those are like the foundation of like what popular literature is. Actually, Glover and Rexroth are like the foundation. And then Foster, who you're reading a lot of, because he gives us these bite-sized pieces, right? Of like, you can look at literature by looking at the quest or looking at symbolism, and they're broken down in all these pieces. That's why I like Foster, because even if you don't know much about interpreting literature, he gives you all these little like perspectives, well, with which you could use. And considering the assignments you have to do this semester, that's good. You have like what I call an official paper. So you have this one academic paper, and if you download it, the assignment description, you'll see I've done my best to try to explain what that is about. But you have several opportunities to talk about all these different subgenres of popular literature. And so we are looking at 3 subgenres, and we are in horror right now. It is such a difficult word for me to pronounce. Horror and dark fantasy, they kind of go together. So what I tried to do in these subgenres was to give you 2 that kind of go together, because the other thing that's super important is that we are reading 6 texts, and you have to find number 6. So I did have a brief conversation with the students, like, when should I start looking? Like right now, you should start looking for the genre that you may be interested in adding. And I just asked that it is part of, I'm gonna open, I think, the document. It should be part of the, one of the genres that we're already in, but it's up to you. I don't care if it's long, if it's short, if it's Harry Potter, if it fits in with the 3 genres that we're looking at, then yeah, it'll work for you. But the idea is that by the time we get done, you will have read, so in the horror and dark fantasy, I've already given you a pair matchup. So you have Lovecraft and Lavelle, they go together. But if you wanted to pick one and went into that category, it's fine, and you have 3 in that category. However, in the detective and crime, we have 1. So detective, crime, and mystery, we have 1 text that I provided. So if you like, for example, if you love E.Z. Rawlins, who is the main character in Devil in a Blue Dress, you want to read something else in that series, it's fine. And then we also have only 1 in speculative fiction and time travel. So the idea, I wanted to get that out there first, that yes, you have to read 6 primary texts, but you have to find that 6th one. And I believe you need that for the final project that you have to do, second to final. You have to do a multimedia presentation, and that's the one I asked that you use at least the text that you found for yourself. So hopefully that explains, and it gets at least the 8 of you thinking about what else you might want to read. And again, I'm not picky about the length or anything. You see that Lovecraft isn't very long. And the novella that you read, actually, Lavelle is considered a novella. It's long, it's too long to be a short story and not long enough to be a novel. So it's called a novella. All right, so that's enough of my lecture. I'm gonna go back to our discussion here. So one of the things I'm gonna try to do is I'm I want us to think about, and you've already written about these things in the discussion. So one of the three questions are, what's the rationale for even studying popular literature? So you all have your first level reason of why you took it. It could be, I need these humanities courses or these humanities credits, but people who may read this, what is a rationale? What is a reason? What is an argument for why people would just want to read things that are considered popular and not say like the greats? Like I'm not sitting down to read Moby Dick, but I want to read Harry Potter or Twilight and anything like that, or even Dracula. And then the other question was, what are some definitions of popular literature? Says who? Well, I give you two people. Well, three. It's McCracken and Glover. They had the one chapter that you read, and then you also read Rex Roth. So hopefully throughout the semester, you'll pick up some other Says who besides the few people that I gave you. And I want you to keep in mind that Foster actually isn't telling us how to read popular literature, or Foster is not telling us specifically about popular literature. So when I break you off into these little groups to talk for a little bit, I really just want to focus on the first two questions here. We will probably come back to question 3 on a maybe later today, but maybe later in another virtual discussion, because I only gave you like the horror and dark fantasy presentation. So you don't have much yet about the criteria. So what I'm gonna do is have you think about these two questions. I'm gonna do my best to put you into breakout rooms, probably just about 5 minutes. And there are 8 of you, so it'll probably just be 2 breakout rooms. And then have us come back together and debrief about those 2 questions. So I say this repeatedly so that either you can write the questions down or you have them, because I'm not sure you won't be able to see my screen in the breakout rooms. So the question is, why do people do this? And then what is it from your perspective? And then also thinking about, not from your perspective, from the reading, and what is it that Foster is doing? Because Foster is not telling us about popular literature. So before I hit this breakout room, I think, are there any questions? I want breakout automatic. I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out my breakout room things. I think you're gonna have like 6 minutes, and I have it set that the breakout room should automatically bring us back together. All right, I think this is it. You should see an invitation to join your breakout room. So I mistakenly joined one breakout room. I know you might have saw me poke in there. I'm like, oh, it actually puts me in the room, and I don't want to be in there for the conversation. So did it work for everyone? I am recording again, so. Did it work?
Yeah, that worked well.
It did work, yeah.
Okay, so here's the deal. It's interesting. Unless I actually physically put myself in there, I have no idea what you all are talking about. So it's really important that when we come back together as this full group, you all can at least have one or two or someone, if we don't have a lot of people tonight, like at least report out for the two conversations. And then we can have somewhat of a larger group discussion about these two questions. So how did it go? It's your turn now.
I think our group went pretty well. I was going back on Blackboard to look at some of the things that I had said before and which text I had connected it to. One of the things I brought up for lesson 1 was for what is a rationale for studying popular literature, was kind of getting at, I think Foster gets at it a little bit with the idea of a quest, but how a lot of these things like reflect on personal stories or real life experiences. And I kind of saw rationale as to kind of study like different people's or different characters' handling of different situations. And I think also, even especially in the Lavelle text, I think really gets at the choices that a person has and the choices they can make. So I think that can kind of be a rationale for studying. Personally, I think that's a rationale for it, and I think also the text got at that a little bit.
Oh, okay, thank you. Other folk? So Luke has given breakout room 1 some leeway here. Breakout room 2.
In the second breakout room, we talked about a rationale for studying popular literature. Could be that it oftentimes reflects the culture of where it may be popular, so it can help to understand a culture a little bit better by reading popular literature from different areas of the world.
Yeah. Anybody else? Like different areas, even like generational. I tell you, the only reason I cracked open the Twilight book was because I had teenage daughters who were interested in it for 2 seconds. Any other comments about rationale or even anything? Or what about the second question? What is it that we're learning from at least those 3 authors before, because one of them has 2 people, about what popular literature is? And then I said to you all, Foster doesn't speak specifically to pop lit. So what is Foster doing if he's not speaking directly to pop lit? If you had time, I didn't even ask if I gave you enough time. Maybe you didn't have enough time.
We didn't really talk about that in break, like our group, but just I'll make a personal comment. I think Foster just kind of talks about like how to read intelligently and like between the lines, rather than just like reading just for the story and moving on to the next thing, just like getting the symbolism. And maybe not, it's just like any text you read, you can use what he's writing about.
Yes. So it's because Foster is like, this is how you read literature, and popular literature is what I've been throwing it around. Does everybody get me when I say sub-genre of literature? If anyone out there gets it, can you offer a definition of like what a sub-genre is? If not, I will. Don't let me, James, go ahead.
Like a subgenre would be like just like a category, such as like for popular fiction, a category could be what you mentioned, horror or mystery or detective.
Yep, exactly. So literature is this whole, the big category, and then there are different types of literature. Popular literature versus the classics would be 2 subgenres, and within them you have subgenres, and it kind of goes on. So we are looking at popular literature, and within it we're looking at 3 subgenres. And even when we look at like horror and dark fiction, yes, they're kind of the same, but they're kind of different. And so the fluidity of giving definitions. So I don't want anyone in this class to be like, I have the definition for popular culture. I mean, for popular literature. It's like right now, I have a pretty good definition backed up by this evidence and this support. But according to just the 2 readings that you had already, Glover, McCracken, and Rexroth, like, yeah, but you gotta kind of be able to go with the flow with it. And then someone mentioned earlier about using popular literature to understand different cultures in the world around us. I think Rexroth, correct me, people who read it more recently than I have, that could be as little as like right before you started this session. I think Rexroth is the one that talks a lot about cultural, even though they both do Glover, but cultural and influences, so cultural values and influences. And I recall someone even posted about marginalized voices. So paying attention to voices that you don't normally hear. So popular culture is one of those places where a lot of voices get to enter, but we still have to often look for them. So we do get to learn a lot about, for example, how many women are we reading this? We got 6, well, we have 5 that I selected. We got 1 woman. It wasn't because, you know, I had so many to pick from. So, so you want to keep in mind those definitions. And then on the spot then, Foster is doing something different, and we can use Foster to apply to any literature that we look at. Another thing about popular literature you will often find is, unlike other literary categories, it often gets turned into other forms of mass media pretty quickly. So that's another thing, like it's accessible to people. I want to move on because I'm looking at our time, because I do want us to think about, so I kind of categorize really, really huge categories that Foster gives us approaches to reading literature, is these little bite-sized pieces of using, and it's going to be great when you are doing your short assignments and even discussions to use Foster to apply. And then Glover and McCracken, who I left the person's name off, gives us this overview of popular culture, and then Rexroth does also gives us those definitions, but a lot about marginalized voices and cultural influences. And this goes with some of our learning outcomes for this course. It's like, how can we actually use literature to understand the world around us? And then that brings me to giving you some time to think about and talk about horror and fantasy, and specifically, why? What is the purpose of reading in this genre or writing in this genre? And in the presentation, bring that up, I think I had it. I found my typos, but I also found this information I wanted to focus on. So the different types of, so this is where we get into like some of the characteristics and formulas. What do you expect? So in horror and dark fantasy, you expected it was going to have some of these components. It's going to be something about religion, because religion is scary, right? It's been presented that way in mass culture. Folklore, and that's, folklore is more like, it's like, I would say it's in the same realm of religion, but it's like it's secular, but it's beliefs and values and stories and oral tradition. And then you have the supernatural, but most likely you're gonna have horror and dark fantasy that doesn't just pick one of those, it combines them all together. So if you've gotten through, let's see, I think Lavelle has it has got like supernatural and folklore in it together. So they're not neat, but they will have the sole purpose is to make people give us the opportunity in a sense to address our fears in different ways, right? So if you haven't looked at this overview, just wanted to say those fears are psychological in our heads, feeling them actually physically in our body. Like if you jump, you get goosebumps, and then emotionally. So it attacks us from all different ways. And so my question here is, the thing is, it wants to feed on our fears. It terrorizes us by giving us a way to look at these human subjects that we try to avoid. And here's a quick little brief list of them from the presentation. So the question that you had, I think in one of the discussion, may have been discussion or the weekly, forget, was why do people seek out fantasy, seek out dark fantasy and horror? So why even do that to yourself? And then which would you classify? So there's one distinction I want to make this in that presentation, is that dark fantasy, well, let me ask, does anybody remember the one distinct feature for dark fantasy that may separate it from horror? Does anybody remember or have a guess? Yeah, no? Going once, going twice? It has to do with perspective. So whose perspectives do we get in those two stories? Lovecraft story, whose perspective is presented, and then the Lavelle, whose perspective is presented. So I have a couple questions up here about those two stories. You can talk about whatever you want. I do want us to think about why people seek this out. Are there any cultural influences in the two texts? Remember, these two texts talk to each other. Lavelle was a fan of Lovecraft as a kid, and he wrote his novella based on the short story. We get a whole different perspective of that short story. So these two pieces work together to give us a conversation. So I'm gonna give you probably like 7 or 8 minutes to talk about applying and thinking about these two works in your groups, if that's okay. And let's see if I can change my options of my time here. Yeah. And then you're going off to your room again, should be. You mute your cameras. I'm recording. All right. So it looks like everyone's back. Hopefully that gave you a little more time. Remember, this is our first attempt doing this, so yeah. All right. So the questions, what'd you talk about? Remember, you had 4 people in your group. So the point of coming back and exchanging aloud is so that we can get this whole sort of all 8 people can get an idea for what kinds of discussions happened. So who'd like to start? It can't be me. Can we get someone from one of the groups who didn't report out perhaps last time? Can you, am I only hearing me? So the questions about why do we, why is horror and dark fantasy even part of this whole discussion? What'd you talk about? You gotta unmute. Like I see Molly is not muted, but
Okay, I'll go. We
thank you.
yeah, no problem. We were kind of saying that like we're kind of I don't enjoy like horror and I enjoyed these, but I don't typically like pick a horror or dark fantasy book. And so I was like kind of saying, why would somebody choose to read that? And we were kind of saying like it just kind of keeps people on edge and like draws out an emotional reaction, not just like emotional like sad or happy, but like I don't know, like probably people read these the same reason they go into haunted houses or like just they like to be, yeah.
And we just want to know, like, how would you articulate that? And people, if you hear someone from your group struggling, please join in and say, hey, I was there too, Molly. We only have about 6 minutes left. I want to get something out of it before we wrap up here. But thank you, Molly. Yes. Why do people go into haunted houses? Why do we need to explore the devil and religion? And I mean, I know I prefer jumpy. I prefer things that scare me physically, like boo. It's surprising. But I also like psychological, but it has to be not real. Like it's gotta be supernatural because I don't really believe in the supernatural. I don't like horror that could actually really happen. Can we get something from the other group? And I have up here on the screen the difference between dark fantasy and horror, like this little splitting of the hairs.
So in our little breakout group, we kind of discussed that, or kind of thought that maybe the dark fantasy was like the Ballad of Black Tom and the horror was the horror at Red Hook. We also kind of struggled like, hey, maybe they could be a little bit interchangeable, but we're still a little, unclear. But we kind of went with the horror at Red Hook as a horror because it was a little more gruesome, we feel. And the Ballad of Black Tom was more of like a story, like you focused on the character. So yeah, I guess that was.
I mean, I buy that. People on the call, do you buy that? I mean, the instructor had to have a reason. One had to go in the other, and hey, one has the word horror right in the. Even if you're just like guessing, that's a good one.
Oh, I'm back. But yes, I buy that. And I think that in the horror at Red Hook, it was really about that final scene, the very gruesome scene. And that was kind of the main event. And while that happened in Laval's story, at the end, there was kind of a big event. It was way more about Black Tom's life and how he ended up becoming this villainous character and the events that surrounded it and the society that contributed to it. So it's kind of more in depth, whereas the horror genre is a little bit more jumpy.
Yeah, and we also get the perspective from the quote supernatural being. Like Tom is not a supernatural being, but he becomes this thing over time, and we get all of this from his perspective. And so that is one of the other reasons that this would push the Ballad of Black Tom over to dark fantasy, because we get all those characters, but we actually see some transformation of this person into a non-like human person. And we could delve into all the reasons why. So we're running out of time, and hopefully we will talk about these. And I want you to think about the cultural aspects of both these texts. And if you haven't listened to the interview with the author of the Ballad of Black Tom, you should listen to that interview, because he helps you understand like why he even decided, let me just write a book about a 1924 story and fill out all the characters. So the supplementary material, I'm not requiring it, but in this case, because this is the only 2 texts we have that kind of go together, you might want to listen to at least that one interview, I suggest.
Where can we find that interview? I must have missed it or gone skimmed over it or something, but can you?
Okay, so hopefully you can see the screen here.
Yeah.
And we are down to 2 minutes. One of the things I ask you to do is, before you log out, is to record in a chat either a question, a reflective comment, or a thought based on how things went in our discussion. So I want to put that out there because we have 1 minute and you're free to go. I'm going to answer this question and show you where it is. So it is in week 1, I believe. It's right here, the interview, primary literature, the Ballad of Black Tom. And so if you click on that, it should take you, yeah. And you can listen to it, or you can download the transcript and read it.
Okay.
So hopefully the primary text and the chapters that I assigned earlier last week, those are all required, but then you have all these other supplementary. And I listened to this, and that actually made me want to read the book even more once I listened to that. I see people are logging off. Thank you all for joining us on this first round, and congratulations on doing that. And hopefully it was helpful. And I'll try to get more interesting as we go through the next one. So you were here tonight. You do not have to show up tomorrow. You do not have to post anything on Blackboard about it. But I will make the recording available on Blackboard for people who are here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Professor Mohammed?
Yes.
Is
Yes.
so is it the Zoom sessions one or the other you choose every week, or is it like you choose to go to Wednesday or Thursday? Okay.
Yeah, so there are 3. So this is session 1, but I decided to offer 2 opportunities this week.
Okay.
So yeah, you do 1, and then we'll have 1 in week 4 and 1 in week 6.
Okay.
And I made them that way so that at least moving forward, we're going to talk more about the primary text.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.